From September 17th, the 2 Army Corps of the German 15th Army was a thorn in the side of Montgomery's army group. As long as this German army was in Noord-Brabant, the British army could not think about an advance into Germany without being threatened in the back. The Canadian army was clearly not capable to deal with this army alone, and a concerted effort was needed to drive the army out. Montgomery conceived Operation Pheasant, which was a plan to attack the 15th Army from all sides to prevent the Germans from reinforcing a threatened sector with troops from a quiet sector. An important axis of attack was the so-called Operation Suitcase. Suitcase was the breakthrough of the front with a two-pronged attack towards Essen, in order to break open the German defenses and push deep into the German rear. The Canadian 4th Armoured Division would move towards Bergen op Zoom to cut off Battlegroup Chill, including Heydte's 6th Parachute Regiment. The British 49th Division would attack towards Roosendaal, which was an important rail junction. In order to give the British infantry the necessary punch, the 34th Armoured Brigade was attached for good measure. In any case, we will show the unfolding of this operation on brigade and regiment level to get a good idea of the sequence of events. On October 20th, Operation Suitcase kicked off and the attack was an immediate success. The front was ripped wide open and by the end of the day, the Canadians had broken through at Kalmthout and the British were firmly in control of Woensdrecht. The 34th Armoured Brigade advanced towards Nieuwmoer but didn't take this village. The defences of the German 346th Division had been swept away and the road northwards to Essen lay open. Help was however on the way for the Germans in the form of their Army Reserve, the 2nd Battalion of the 6th Parachute Regiment. That was Rolf Mager's battalion, which we saw in earlier episodes. It was hastily put in trucks and transported to block the advance. His men knew by now that every time they were trucked there was trouble. Mager's men were dropped in Nieuwmoer and reinforced the newly arrived battery of assault guns. The next day, newly arrived German troops from the east attacked the British infantry with the help of assault guns. Meanwhile, the 34th Armoured Brigade, better known as Clark Force, resumed their advance to Nieuwmoer in order to keep up with their Canadian brethren in armour in the west. Unfortunately, they crashed into the defences of Mager's men who were supported by assault guns. Nevertheless, the British managed to capture Nieuwmoer by a flanking attack coming in from the west. The German forces subsequently retreated behind the Roosendaal-Essen-Wouw. This canal was regarded as a suitable defense obstacle and another battery of assault guns was positioned near the main road to Essen to block the British-Canadian advance. While the British were struggling with the Germans on their eastern flank, the Canadians on the left had broken through the German lines. Contrary to Allied custom, the Canadians didn't hold their advance at dusk, but kept advancing during the night until they reached Essen at daybreak. The liberation of Essen did not only open the road to Roosendaal in the north, but also to advances on the east-west axis. Local historian Johan van Doorn has correctly assessed that the Germans had been lucky that the British had been held up, otherwise the Allies could have exploited this success instantly with devastating consequences for the Germans. Mager's battalion had blocked the entire armoured brigade long enough to take the steam out of the attack of the British 49th Division. Germans in the west of Essen had pulled back due to their exposed eastern flank as a result of the Canadian breakout, and the 858th Regiment was moved all the way to Nispen. The remnant of the 1018th Regiment was pulled back to the east, and in order to block the road north of Essen, a newly arrived battery was put into place to support the weak 858th Regiment. If we see the arc of assault gun batteries and infantry, the Germans clearly expected a continuation of the Canadian northeastward armoured attack towards Roosendaal, or further east. Near Woensdrecht, another German regiment was moved in to the line to keep the pressure on the British. What the Germans apparently didn't expect was a westward attack, because this sector was only covered by a weak battalion from Battlegroup Chill. The Germans had good reasons not to expect an attack from that direction, because such an attack would run into a heavily forested area, which was unsuitable for tanks, and it was covered by a small river, which acted as a tank ditch. Nevertheless, the Canadian Armoured Division had their sights on Berg op Zoom and believed that after 3 days of fighting a clean breakthrough had been achieved, and now it was time to exploit their success by driving into the rear of their nemesis during the last 2 weeks, the Fallschirmjäger Regiment 6 at Heydte. The capture of Berg op Zoom would surround all German units south of the city and would lead to their destruction. The breakout would be performed by the armor of the 4th Brigade, while the infantry of the 10th Brigade would hold position at Essen. This redeployment of forces costed time, and meanwhile it was hoped that the British could catch up, at least partly. The next day the British would attempt to fan out eastward of Essen with the armoured Clark force to clear out the Germans from the flank and lay the groundwork for an attack to the north. This attack ran, however, into Maag's battalion, which was supported by assault guns, and this time the German paratroopers also managed to blunt the attack. This was a second time that the attack of Clark force was blunted by this mix of Fallschirmjäger and assault guns, which had become common in the Hoge Heide sector. In that sector, a Canadian attack was taking place. On October 24th, the Canadian 4th Brigade didn't fare much better than Clark force, as it was ambushed on the road to Wouwse Plantage by the Hermann Göring training battalion and the remnants of the 280th Assault Gun Brigade. There was, in other words, no breakout, but the armoured advances bogged down on both sides of the initial breakthrough to Essen. The Allies had to reshuffle to collect forces for the next attack. On the right flank, the British around Woensdrecht would be relieved by an American infantry regiment, which would in turn relieve a brigade for an assault in the area east of Essen and take over from Clark force. Another brigade relieved the Canadian 10th Brigade at Essen, so it could support the Canadian attack towards Berg op Zoom. Operation Suitcase had been derailed by the stubborn resistance of the Hermann Göring troops at Wouwse Plantage on the left, while Maag's battalion had thwarted the attack of the British. The high hopes for Operation Pheasant were dashed, and it was decided to impose an operational pause to draw up new plans.